Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
The interview series, Reflections in Time, was begun by the late Professor Paul Borghi more than 20 years ago. This new series continues Paul's work and is dedicated to his memory. My name's Jack Newton. I'm retired now, but I'm still active as a professor emeritus. I've been on the faculty of UN Omaha since 1960 and served for 20 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked closely with Professor Borghi in the development of his original interview series, and I can think of no more fitting tribute to him than to continue this work. It's a cold day in January, the year's 2005, and I have as my guest today Professor Jerry Cederblom, who has kind of a dual personality here. He's a professor of philosophy and he's also chair of the Goodrich Scholarship Program. Jerry, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Let's begin by talking about you a little bit. We've known each other for a long time since you first came here, but I don't think I've ever asked you much about your background. Where do you come from? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
I grew up in Washington State, and I went to high school in Spokane, Washington, and then I went to college in a small college in southeastern Washington called Whitman College. It's in Walla Walla, Washington. One of your former faculty, Mike Gillespie, went to Whitman College also. Yeah. And then I was a philosophy major there, and then I went to graduate school at the Claremont Graduate School, Claremont, California. And then this was my first full-time job out after grad school.
Well, I can understand why you went to Whitman, perhaps, because it was close to where you grew up. But how did you pick Claremont? I went to 1 year at the University of Washington right after I graduated from Whitman College. I was married at the time, and my wife and I were trying to figure out schools we could both go together. She was working on a Master of Fine Arts in art, and they had a good program in philosophy and in art at Claremont, and also I got a fellowship. So that does help. Doesn't it? Helps make a decision too.
For sure.
Well, how did you get interested in philosophy as a discipline? That's a little unusual.
It is, and it's kind of a funny story. I would talk to my parents and anyone who would listen about philosophical ideas when I was a kid, and it would just kind of bore people. And when I was 15 years old, my mom bought a copy of the great books of the Western world. She was a sucker for any salesman, door-to-door salesman that came along. And my dad came home from work and was shocked to find out that this was about 1959. She had spent $700 on a set of the great books of the Western world. And he was aghast, and he said, "Who's going to read these things?" So I just sat down when we put them in the reading room in our house, and I plucked out a volume just at random. It was by the Greek philosopher Theaetetus, and I just started reading it. He was a determinist, and I realized that I was too, and the ideas that he was expressing, I thought, these are like old friends. This is what I think about all the time. What is this person? Oh, a philosopher. I guess that's what I am. And I actually knew right at that time that that's exactly what I wanted to be. That was quite an advantage to me because I didn't like to study, but I liked ideas. And I was kind of lazy, not a great student in high school, and if I didn't have that goal, I mean, I found out that in order to be a philosopher, the only thing I could be would be a college professor, and to do that I would have to get good grades and I'd have to study harder. So having that really focused goal from age 15 was, I think, what kind of turned me around more towards academics.
I'd say you were very lucky to have established that so early. So many people dabble in this and that, and don't really have any direction until they...
It was just a huge stroke of luck and really pretty much accidental.
So when you graduated from Claremont in, what, 1972?
Yes.
Then you came to Omaha.
Right, yeah.
Could you tell us about that? How did that happen?
As I said, I went to Whitman College with a fellow named Mike Gillespie. He was my brother's roommate. And Mike was a philosophy student. Matter of fact, my brother and Mike and I all were in the same Intro to Philosophy course together in 1962, it would have been. And I got to know Mike very well. He went to Southern Illinois in philosophy and got a PhD. And then he came here. Bill Blezik, who was on the faculty at the time, knew Mike from Southern Illinois and was instrumental in hiring him. And a position opened up here that was kind of a new sort of position. The Goodrich Scholarship Program was being formed, but the people who were forming it needed faculty from a variety of disciplines, so they left it to different departments to try to recruit people to teach both in their department and in this new program. And Mike thought of me and called me, and I came out and interviewed.
Well, that Goodrich Scholarship Program that you are just talking about, that you started out in and continue in, is interesting, maybe unique. Tell us something about it. I know a little bit about it, but our listening audience may not.
It really is unique. It's a program every year. We bring in about 76 new freshman Goodrich scholars. And in order to qualify, they must be students with financial need. And we make a special effort to make it a multicultural, multiracial group. I would say a little over half of our students are students of color. Next August, we'll celebrate our 1,000th Goodrich graduate. So each year we bring in 76, and now when we first started, our graduation rate was pretty low, but the UNO graduation rate was pretty low, and we've worked our way up to about a 55% graduation rate. Our program has gotten a number of national awards, a Hesburgh Award, a Retention Award, and I think it's really one of the jewels of the university.
Well, it's a whole lot more than just a financial aid program.
That's right.
Tell us how it differs from a financial aid program.
Mainly in that we have a core curriculum for our students that consists of part of the courses they take in their freshman and sophomore years. And I would say it's one of the paradigm learning communities in the United States. You hear that word in education a lot now. The Iowa colleges even bill it on radio and TV that come here and your freshman son or daughter will be in a learning community. And the idea, which has really been verified by a lot of research in education, is that students learn best and they're most successful in college if they make a lot of connections with other students, with faculty, with the institution. So by our students being in these core courses together in small numbers, classes of about 20, over their first 4 semesters, they become like a family. They get to know the other 75 students in their class really, really well. When we have alumni gatherings, we find that people who made friends in our program are still best friends. Sometimes they marry each other. They keep track of each other. So I think it's a safe entry point into the larger university for students who sometimes are a little leery and uncertain. Very often our students are first in their family to go to the university. So I think this sort of personal entry point, a lot of interaction with the faculty, it's what's really helped our program.
You mentioned that the freshman year was sort of a core curriculum type year. Could you tell us a little bit about what that core curriculum is like?
Yes, as the program has evolved, we've become more and more writing intensive, and in the first semester, the freshmen take both an English composition course and a course in autobiographical writing. And I would say that I often teach the autobiographical writing course, and I would say the students in my course write about 50 pages that they're going to get feedback on from their peers and from me. And then in the English composition course, they're doing a lot of writing also. So we think this really prepares them for the whole remainder of their curriculum. And then in the spring semester of the freshman year, there's an interdisciplinary humanities course called Perspectives on American Culture. And I think the fact that we have a multicultural group of students and that each of them sees attention given to their own individual culture is kind of a welcoming point too. There are 2 courses in the sophomore sequence in the social sciences, but I think at that point it's not so much the particular subject matter that matters as keeping this learning community together and keeping the ties and guidance.
Well, if I remember correctly, and you can certainly correct me on this, but if I remember correctly, originally, way back when it started, the program was going to have humanities, social sciences, and math and natural sciences as well. But we never got to including those.
No, we didn't. I mean, and it was partly budgetary. We're really building back in that direction now. But when we were delighted to get the appropriation that we initially did. The name of the program, the Goodrich program, is named after Glenn Goodrich, who was the chair of the Appropriations Committee in the unicameral.
Nebraska legislature.
Right, yes. And I'm diverting from your initial question a little, but we'll get back to it. Glenn Goodrich grew up very poor in East Omaha. He would tell stories of having to scrounge around for empty pop bottles to sell for enough money for dinner some evenings. But he became successful by getting a degree in engineering, and I think he had an electrical engineering company. And one of his strongest beliefs was that the route out of poverty is education. And representing the Omaha district, he really wanted more scholarships for poorer students from Omaha. So he arranged this appropriation for the Goodrich program, and it was generous in the sense that it provided these tuition scholarships for all these students and the money for faculty. But we weren't able to swing enough to have faculty staffing through the sciences. Right now, we've linked up with a program that Jack Heidel in the math department got a grant, I think from the National Science Foundation. Yes, I think it's from the National Science Foundation for scholarships for potential math, science, and engineering and technology majors. And Goodrich is working hand in hand with this program called the STEP STEM program, an acronym for those fields. And so we're helping recruit students, and many Goodrich students are getting both the Goodrich scholarship and then some additional money to major in math and sciences. And we're hoping to maybe expand in the direction of a faculty member in math or the sciences as we develop this partnership.
Good. The other question I had was, since these are, your students go into many different disciplines, how do you interact with the colleges that these students, some of them may be in arts and sciences, some in business, some in engineering even.
Right, yes.
How do you interact with the colleges?
Well, each student has an academic advisor in addition to their Goodrich advisor. So if we have a math or physics major, that student has a relationship with that advisor in that department as well as ours. And one reason we have our core curriculum as only 6 credit hours in the first 2 semesters and then 3 credit hours in the next is to allow each student time to take courses in their major as well as their general education courses. So we typically, the Goodrich advisor will be communicating with the student's academic advisor, seeing how they're progressing along. And a lot of times when we have undeclared students, we'll just chat with them about different opportunities and maybe call up a department. Very often I'll have a freshman in my office that they're getting interested in, say, communications, and I'll just get on the phone with, it used to be Deb Smith-Howell or Jeremy now, and say, I've got a Goodrich student here who's interested in this field. Can I arrange an appointment with you? And we send them off in that way.
Does that work out pretty well for them? Do they are they able to establish those interests early on?
Yes, yes. There is a kind of a weaning process. So many of our students get so attached to our program in the sophomore year. Very often then I'll see them in the halls of a classroom building in the junior year, and they'll be saying how they miss the Goodrich courses and they miss seeing their Goodrich friends so much. But usually the next sentence is, but now I've got to get into my psychology major, and I'm getting to know those students better too.
Well, let's step back for just a moment. We were talking about what the Goodrich program is like and what it was like back when you first came here. How did, and we found out how it started through the legislature, but how did it get developed as from a disciplinary point of view? You know, who decided what it was going to be like?
Well, the first dean of the College of Public Affairs was a man named Hubert Locke. When the Goodrich program was formed, there wasn't a College of Public Affairs, it was a School of Public Affairs and Community Service. I believe this was in 1972. And when Senator Goodrich was developing his ideas for this scholarship program, he had some meetings with Hubert Locke, and Hubert Locke drew up the initial blueprint.
Could you tell us a little bit about Hubert Locke?
He's a fascinating person. He didn't come from an academic background, but he was one of the most bright and articulate men I've ever known. He had been a social activist in Detroit, and he was a special assistant to the chief of police in Detroit during the Detroit riots in the late 60s, and then he moved to a number of other social programs. He had, I think he was in charge of some kind of organization that would get grants for different kind of social programs, and then he came into academia. When he came to Omaha, he was brought in by some people that were teaching, I think, in the social work department. A particular man named John Else was active in getting him in. I don't know where he knew Hubert from. But Hubert was one of the best sales people I've ever known, too. And I can just imagine in his conversations with Glenn Goodrich, who was kind of a political odd duck, really conservative in some ways, but Hubert Locke was African-American, and I can just see him selling Glenn Goodrich on making this a multicultural program. Hubert knew that it would be difficult to house this program in any particular department because he wanted it to be interdisciplinary. So he was willing to have it housed in the School of Public Affairs and then in the college as a kind of a neutral ground. And then he left it to the disciplines to come up with candidates for jobs. And I think what was particularly wise was that way there was something in it for the philosophy department or the English department or whoever was recruiting someone, because the salary would be paid by the Goodrich program, but that academic department would get a certain number of courses taught by that faculty member. So I, for example, have taught philosophy courses my whole time here in addition to my teaching with the Goodrich program. So it really is a unique model to have the faculty all with joint appointments in the Goodrich program and then the discipline of their training to teach in both areas, but they're home more in the Goodrich program where they're also advising these students.
Now this brings us back, I guess, then to your dual role here. How does it work being in the philosophy department? Do you, you know, are you treated just like any other member of the department? I
am. It's kind of waxed and waned. It is extra time. You go to 2 sets of meetings, not just one. There's extra work in the Goodrich program, especially when I'm chair. It's like running a small university because we do our own recruitment, selection, monitoring of students, putting them on probation, talking with them about how to stay in. So it's like running a little college. But we have selected people for the program that really love their disciplines, and I love philosophy almost more than anything. It's kind of a toss-up between really enjoying the Goodrich program work and its students and my discipline of philosophy. Right now, I am involved in a research triangle with several of the philosophers, and we've got some great young philosophers that I really enjoy working with. At times when I've thrown myself more heavily into the Goodrich program work, it's more a matter of being there and going over and teaching my courses in philosophy. Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me, though, I meant to ask you earlier when we were talking about the relationship between the Goodrich program and the different colleges that your students might elect majors in. Did that go fairly smoothly, or were there some bumps along the way? If I remember correctly, in arts and sciences there was some concern as to whether these students were getting the same quality education as they would have.
Yeah, I think when I arrived in 1972, a number of things were going on. For one, the formation of the College of Public Affairs, the college was actually formed in '73, as I remember. It was a little bit looked down upon. I think that the faculty of the public administration program were seen by the political science faculty as outcasts or rebels or people that didn't get along very well. And there was a lot of new hiring going on. There was a special emphasis on hiring people of color. It was hard to hire people of color with good academic credentials because everybody in the country all of a sudden wanted a black faculty member or a Latino faculty member. So there was concern about credentials. Is this person going to get their PhD? Are they academically strong enough? And I think there was just some suspicion. There's also some jealousy because due to Hubert being such a great salesperson, our program was well funded. We had a good operating budget. We could take some trips with our students, and these were years that other programs were having their budgets trimmed and dollars were scarce. So for a number of reasons, and just maybe suspecting what is new, there was some, like I remember someone from the psychology department, I can't remember his name, doing a study after just a couple of years of the Goodrich students and how they'd done in other classes. And he was suspicious of whether they were viable students. So though there were suspicions like that early on, but I think through the years we really won over the other colleges and the departments, mainly because our faculty who were participating in those colleges were really good faculty. I think we made excellent choices in the people that we hired.
And the students did well, too.
And the students did very well, and better and better. I think when we first started recruiting students, sometimes we were wishful in what we thought we could accomplish, and maybe we'd select some students that their chances weren't that great. Now, we have certain floors in terms of test scores on the English placement test and so forth. So now I really believe that our students are some of the very best in the university. But there definitely was that period of trying to win over.
It took a little ironing out there and getting used to things.
Absolutely.
And in CPACs, most of the faculty, I guess, came from arts and sciences. You mentioned public administration being taken out of political science.
Right.
Criminal justice and social work were both in the sociology department.
That's right.
And so that department became a whole lot smaller when those folks left and went to the other college.
Yes.
Yeah. And I can't remember, maybe there were others too, but those are those that stand out.
Yeah, those were the main ones, right.
And then, of course, another college was formed, the Fine Arts College was formed at about the same time, and that all was in College of Arts and Sciences as well.
Yeah.
So we got we being College of Arts and Sciences got kind of split up.
Got rated a little bit.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's still going on. Computer science now is part of that new program in IS&T, and Information Science and Technology.
Yep. Right. So
which used to be in Arts and Sciences.
Right.
Well. Can you tell us about anything more about those early years in the Goodrich program?
Lots of great stories. Our formation of our program was, as I said, it's coincidental with the formation of the College of Public Affairs, and Hubert Locke played a strong role in getting our program off its feet, or on its feet. Yeah. When the college was formed and the Goodrich program was formed, Hubert Locke loved this area of Colorado around Crested Butte, and he called a big retreat for the formation of the College of Public Affairs, and also for each department to kind of develop its plan. So we all drove out there in the summer of 1973. There was a retreat master, John Else, who brought Hubert in, and I think he was at that time on the social work faculty, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he was originally in the sociology department.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
I see.
But in that social work program.
Right. Okay. And so we were out here in this mountain town, and many of our faculty, I remember one of my good friends, Phil Secret, the late Phil Secret, he passed away a few years ago, but I don't think he'd been out of eastern Nebraska. He grew up in North Omaha, was working on a PhD in political science at Lincoln. And another of my friends, Ray Unks, was from Detroit, and there was a proposal to go on a Jeep ride on these high mountain trails. It wasn't even really roads. And I remember we got about a quarter of a mile, and Phil made us turn around and go back. He was not going around one more hairpin turn. But in between the recreational times, we had long, serious meetings, and the spirit behind the department and its mission was really formed, and this dedication to public service, the focus on how the college could serve the community was really deeply instilled from the very beginning there. Hubert was as much as an inspirer as a leader, and Hubert saw it as very important in the Goodrich program that we have strong community ties. So one of the first chairs, after some interim chairs and beginning attempts to get leadership, the first people he picked was a woman named Wilda Stevenson, an African-American woman who taught in the Omaha public schools for years and years and was really well respected in the Omaha community. And she served as chair for 8 years, 7 or 8 years, through the 70s, and I became interim chair in '81. These were difficult times to get a program like this going. As I had mentioned earlier, everyone in the country was trying to hire minority faculty, and we believed we couldn't have this kind of multicultural program without having some of our faculty as minority faculty. And I remember we had to hire people very often kind of on speculation, hoping they would come along. Maybe they weren't that far along on their dissertation, and it was difficult. We ended up with just some excellent faculty, but I think more than other programs we had to get people in, let them give it a try, and if they didn't work, we had to not renew them. We had to deny tenure in a couple cases. So I think it's one thing to be a chair of a department that's had a long, stable history and have a number of established ongoing faculty, and occasionally to have a tenure problem. But I think it's quite another to get a program going from the start with all younger faculty, and to have to do a lot of recruiting and expanding and replacing early on. So Wilda just had a steady hand, an extremely fair person.
Yeah, she is a great person.
Oh, really, nobody ever doubted her dedication, and we won a lot of credibility in the minority communities in Omaha by having her as chair in those early years.
Well, the whole university was in a state of transition at about that time too. I mean, we've mentioned the establishment of new colleges, but we haven't mentioned that it was just a couple years before that the university became part of the state system, and before it was a municipal university.
Yeah.
And no, how did you folks in Goodrich get along with your colleagues in well, I guess it was just the Lincoln campus back then.
Right.
We didn't have Kearney yet.
No.
More recently.
But I remember all the kind of suspicion and just indignation, and you probably remember that well too. I mean, if
I was in the middle of it. Yes.
Some meeting with Lincoln faculty, we were still the bandits that were stealing resources and diluting the educational mission away from...
Well, that's why I asked the question, because you had a special appropriation and you had lots of money.
Absolutely. No, yeah, and we were right in their sights a number of times. I remember those being really interesting years, and you probably remember that well too, because to be for UNO to be expanding right at the time of, at the end of that social activist era, where you had a whole lot of students going into graduate school, some of them avoiding the war in Vietnam or getting more interested in social ideas. So all of this hiring going on around, what, 69, 70, 71, 72, I mean, the campus looked like an invasion of young hippies coming in as faculty. I remember Bill Bleasick, Mike Gillespie, and I, all kids of the 60s, in our late 20s, starting an academic career. And you remember the numbers of new faculty coming in. So it's really an invigorating time, but also a time where, you know, in many departments there was kind of a split, wasn't there, between this band of young Turks and then a group of older faculty. And it's interesting that through the years now, we're the old established, you know, we're the old guard.
And the young Turks are coming in again because everybody's retiring. Yeah?
That's right, yeah.
Well, let's let me ask you a little bit about your discipline. About you teach a number of courses in philosophy.
Philosophy, yes.
Which ones are the most fun? Which one do you like the best?
You know, one course that I really love is one. I had a colleague named Dave Paulson who was in the Goodrich program with me, and in philosophy, I think we were the only department that had two Goodrich people in the same discipline. And Dave was a brilliant man. I think he had gone through the University of Chicago in 2.5 years. He could test out of most math and science courses, and then he'd gone to Stanford. And we invented a course for the Goodrich program and got it included in the philosophy offerings as well, and the course was called Critical Reasoning. This was, about 1975. Since then, what became known as the critical thinking movement has really expanded nationwide, but when we introduced that course, it was one of a very few courses in the country in something called critical thinking or critical reasoning. And we used the outline of our course to write a textbook that we titled Critical Reasoning that we co-authored. As a matter of fact, I was just talking with David on the phone yesterday. He teaches at Evergreen State College in Olympia now, and we're writing the 6th edition of Critical Reasoning, and we were talking about this one kind of technical chapter on statistical reasoning. So David would handle, we looked at how to evaluate arguments and also inductive arguments based on statistics and even empirical theories. And he handled more the statistics and empirical theories, and I handled more of the arguments. But now it's one of the most frequently taught philosophy courses on UNO campus. The philosophy department offers, I would bet maybe 8 or 10 sections of the course per year, and nationwide I would say more than half of all undergraduate students take this course. So I think it's a way in which the Goodrich course, being young and experimental, is just one of the many things that we did even in the 70s that's kind of caught on later. So that's always been a favorite course. Critical thinking, critical reasoning. Were you involved at all in the, what should I say, the infamous Harry Stottlemyre episode? No, only peripherally, but Mike Gillespie, Philosophy for Kids was coming along right at the same time as this wide critical thinking movement. And Mike Gillespie and John Langen, who is now Dean of College of Education, offered a Philosophy of Kids program in several school districts. And some of the parents reacted really strongly. I mean, they saw it as challenging parental authority. They didn't like the idea of kids thinking on their own. So it was
I had John Langan on as a guest not too long ago, and he told a lot about that. It was an interesting story.
I'll say. Yeah.
So one of the things I've noticed as I've looked through your, the list of things you've written and done, is that you, I don't know whether it's unusual for philosophers or not, but you seem to emphasize both theoretical and applied aspects of your discipline.
Right, yeah.
Is that an unusual thing, or is that common?
It was pretty unusual until, I would say, about the 1980s. There was a big movement towards applied ethics. It was spurred partly by scandals in business, and there was just a hue and cry for teaching more ethics. And so philosophers started getting involved in writing texts and teaching courses in business ethics, professional ethics of different kinds. And I had a good friend at Creighton University named Charlie Doherty. He became the provost there later, but at the time that I knew him, he was in the philosophy department. And I'd started a book on business ethics, and I saw that he was working in the field of medical ethics, and he had written a number of really good articles in that area. So I linked up with him, and we co-authored a book called Ethics at Work. And I have used it as a text in a course in business ethics that we have. But then Charlie and I also did a lot of workshops around Nebraska here, and I did some workshops nationally. One workshop that was really interesting was this. Berkshire Hathaway owns a very large insurance company in town called National Indemnity. I believe it's an insurance company that covers huge losses by other insurance companies. So if someone is facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, it's National Indemnity that would defend them, decide whether to litigate or settle, cover if they have to settle. And as you know, Warren Buffett is a very ethical man and very interested in having all of his companies schooled in ethics. So
he was the founder of Berkshire Hathaway.
That's right. That's right. So the head of National Indemnity, and I can't remember his name. Well, one of the heads, the head of the attorneys there, a fellow named Mike Fortune, called up Charlie and me and asked us to come in and do 2 days of workshops with their attorneys on ethics and reasoning. I thought this was just remarkable because you know all these jokes about lawyers and ethics, and I've seldom encountered a more intelligent and interesting group of people and more interested in really exploring ethical dilemmas. We had them come up with some of their own cases, a situation where you're in a courtroom and there are certain things you could do to make your case go well, but would it be ethical? And just a fascinating 2 days that I spent. So I really enjoyed that. I mean, I really do think philosophy ultimately should have an impact on the world, and I think this area of professional ethics and business ethics is one where it can. Yeah.
One thing I want to be sure we talk about here, and I'm sure you wouldn't mention it if I didn't, so I'm going to embarrass you by talking about some of the honors and awards you've won, which are numerous. The one I would say is the most important, and maybe you have different feelings about it, but I've always appreciated those people who have won the Excellence in Teaching Award, which you did more than 10 years ago now. That, to me, is a special award.
Well, it's really gratifying to feel that your students and colleagues appreciate your teaching. And
being named as one of the best teachers on the campus is a big deal to me.
I think I really benefited by working in the Goodrich program and in the philosophy department, those two programs in particular, because the Goodrich program especially is so teaching intensive, and we did a whole lot of team teaching. And then in the philosophy program also, I've had a number of opportunities to team teach. I think that's one of the best ways to learn to be a good teacher, is team teaching with a lot of other good teachers, or even not so good teachers. I mean, you see the mistakes that each other makes,
Sure.
you can talk about them and correct them. And I mean, if you'll, I don't know if it's listed as an individual award, but the award I would say that I'm most proud of is the Goodrich program receiving the first university-wide departmental teaching award.
Right, and there was some money that came with that.
There was, and we are still drawing from that
Nice.
to support faculty travel. But I've been, I was the chair of the University Committee on the Advancement of Teaching, and I've been involved in promoting teaching on UNO for a long time. And I've often thought that it would be better to have more group teaching awards rather than so many individual teaching awards. I think that teaching, when you work collaboratively on developing your teaching, you're really drawing from the resources of other good teachers. You can watch each other, talk it through. I think one of the things that I helped accomplish that I'm most proud of was the development of a teaching circles program. And one of the main ideas I had there was to make the experience of other faculty like mine in the Goodrich program, where we so frequently talk about how we teach. And when I was the chair of University Committee on Advancement of Teaching in the late 90s, that was one of our main initiatives, was to launch a teaching circles program. And it's ended up involving close to 1/3 of all UNO faculty. Yeah.
That departmental award I know a bit about, because, and it's worth mentioning again, I think, that was started when, in the, I was on the committee. It was, President Massingale who started it out when he was president of the university.
Would that have been around 1990 or?
Yeah, it must have been.
Or maybe
because I remember it was shortly. It was before I left the dean's office, I think, and it was. I was either the UNO representative on the committee or one of the representatives. I can't remember which, but there was a small committee that was appointed by the university president to follow up this idea he had of making this award.
I'm glad you did. I think it was a great idea.
We worked out the details of it anyhow, and it always struck me as being, might mention that this is an award that is made by all to one of the departments in the university, where you're competing with all of the other departments in the whole university.
Right. All four campuses.
All four campuses. Yeah. And so it's quite an accomplishment to get that. And I don't know what the amount originally was, $25,000.
That's exactly, yeah, and I think it still is. And I do think it really does show the university's commitment to teaching. Right. I think during the early 90s, I think almost nationwide there was this feeling of a need to rededicate to undergraduate education. A lot of universities had been competing for research dollars, and the emphasis had been so strongly on research, which is wonderful. But I think there was a little bit of drift away from the undergraduate mission, and I'm glad your committee set up that award. And let's see, did the Department of Communications at UNO win it one year also?
You know,
I think
my memory isn't what it used to be.
But I think when a whole UNO department can put its record on the line and win that award, that is just a wonderful
and you have some others too, to your credit. The Chancellor's Medal you won a few years ago, and
I think that was to a large extent an acknowledgement of the work in getting those teaching circles going. And then I worked with your good friend and successor now as Dean of Arts and Sciences, Shelton Hendricks, on a committee called the Retention Committee in about 1999, I think. Derek Hodgson, who had just come on as Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, he and Chancellor Belk were looking at our retention statistics at UNO, and they just did not look good enough. And so we initiated a number of programs and just really heightened a lot of awareness as far as retaining students. We initiated a program of first-year experience sections of introductory courses, paired courses. All of these initiatives were designed to, following the Goodrich model, to get students more connected with each other, with the faculty, with the university. I think you're probably aware of this big study that Alexander Aston did in the early 90s, where he looked at, it was a multivariate analysis looking at hundreds of variables that go into success in undergraduate education, and he surveyed thousands and thousands of alums of different institutions. And I was surprised. I would never have guessed what came out as the #1 variable promoting success in undergraduate education. It was frequency of student-student interaction, even more so than number of hours studied, and even very slightly ahead of frequency of student-faculty interaction. So on the retention committee, that was one thing that we really worked on. We visited all the different departments and promoted a number of steps for increasing the interaction among students and with faculty and connecting. And I wouldn't suppose to commit the fallacy of post hoc ergo propter hoc, but the retention numbers have really been going up in the last few years, and we're now up with or even ahead of our peer group.
Great, great. Oh, we should also mention, you know, you mentioned when we were talking about your dual role here, you mentioned the amount of time that it took to be both a member of the Goodrich Scholarship Program faculty and a member of the philosophy faculty, but you still found time to do a number of other service activities, we sometimes call them, on campus and off campus too. But you were a member of the Faculty Senate a couple of times at least, maybe more. You served on important committees, university-wide committees. Could you tell us something about what, pick out one or two committees that you've served on?
Well, I think the University Committee for the Advancement of Teaching was one of the most fun, and especially that we actually accomplished that formation of the teaching circles. When we had the idea of creating teaching circles, it was a buzzword that you'd hear all around, but I started going to national meetings to get ideas and try to find a model. And what I found was, there'd be some university that might have 20 people involved in teaching circles, or another where you had to pass certain criteria and you got to be in a group of 6 or something like that. And we wanted something, the idea was that if you were in the business of making tires and you never sat down and met about how to make a tire, you wouldn't be in the tire business very often, or very long, or the computer business. And here we were faculty, and we'd talk about what we did in our department meetings, and rarely would we talk about teaching. So we thought there's got to be a forum. So I found a model where at least at a whole university, they had got 40 people involved, and we kind of built on that. So we just started proposing that we all get together in a big room on a certain day, everyone who was interested in teaching circles. We'd have a bunch of tables set out, and on each table there'd be a topic like active learning exercises, technology and teaching, something like that. We just beat the bushes and begged and threatened all our friends, you got to show up for this, we've got to launch this thing. And the committee worked on it for maybe 6 months, where to have it, how to have it, what to do, who to get involved. And I remember walking over to the ballroom, and I told the chancellor about it, asked her if she'd be there, told Derek Hodgson, asked if he'd be there. We thought, God, what if nobody shows up? Do you think 20 people will come? Oh, I hope 40 people will come. We walked into this room, the ballroom, and there were over 100 people there. And it was just buzzing with activity and excitement. And by the time we were done and got people involved who couldn't come to that meeting, I think we had about 120 people within a week or two in teaching circles, which are just meetings, small groups of faculty meeting together to talk about their teaching. It could be all from a same department or all working on the same problem. And we just saw so much activism that year and the following years, people thinking more about their teaching, getting ideas from each other about their teaching, visiting each other's classrooms. I joined a group of older faculty. We called ourselves the Marathon Men. Jack Schroeder from Geography, Geology, Bill Blizek from Philosophy, Otto Bauer had come back into the faculty. We'd meet at each other's houses, have a little wine, talk, tell our stories, and support each other with problems in the classroom. Now I've belonged to maybe 5 or 6 different teaching circles. I keep shifting from one to another, and I've made a lot of friends across campus. So I think that committee work, and this year, I mean a few weeks ago, I went to another big meeting of teaching circles, and there are all these stories from people about how this had helped their teaching. So that's been, I would say, the most gratifying.
It's interesting, all of the people that you've mentioned here have been guests on this program. So I'm really glad I got you here now, too. That kind of completes it. There's another thing you've been working on more recently that is of particular interest to me because of my advanced age and
oh, the
Senior Scholars Program.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
Tell us about that.
You know, there's a funny story that goes along with this. Remember, a couple of years ago, we had some pretty big budget cuts at UNO, and even 2 years in a row. And it actually got to the point that deans were going to senior faculty and asking them if they might consider retiring. I mean, it got down to the point that it was either that or start cutting lines from departments. And as a long-serving dean, you know how hard that would be. I mean, to cut a tenure track line from a department, that's one of the worst things that you would ever face. So I was out to dinner with Shelton Hendricks and Bill Blizek. Our wives were on a trip to Italy, and Shelton had talked to Bill about whether he might consider retiring at some time. Bill had called me on the phone and said that this had really just jarred him because he'd never thought about it, and all of a sudden to consider retiring and what that would mean. Where would you go? What would you do? It just sounded like having the rug pulled out from under him. To make a long story short, he didn't retire at that time. But Sheldon and Bill and I were thinking, wouldn't it be nice if there were some place on campus where retired faculty could go that would be like a home, a place where you could continue scholarly activity. It might be a home base for serving the university in a number of ways, tutoring students, serving on committees, serving on dissertation or thesis committees. It could be an organization where if senior faculty were needed to serve, the university could contact them through this organization. I went to Chancellor Belk, and John Christensen was just becoming the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at that time. Their support was absolutely overwhelming. Chancellor Belk put money out of her own budget to renovate 2 rooms in the library. And you were at the opening, Jack, I saw you there. We got donations for nice furniture, leather couches and chairs, computers to be put in. So now this 2-room suite is the Senior Scholars Academy. We've got a listserv with 3 senior faculty or retired faculty playing leadership roles. Bob Runyon, the former library dean, Marianne Lamanna, professor emeritus of sociology. Mark Rousseau is still an active faculty member, but we've got a number of older faculty involved. So they've had a number of activities. I know you're going to be giving a presentation soon. We've had people come in and talk about books they've written. And in 2 weeks I'm interviewing Dr. Lamanna, so that should be interesting. That'll be terrific. But we think this is something that 5 years from now we're going to be really glad we did, because when we set up the Senior Scholars Academy, we looked at the number of UNO faculty that are 55 and older, and it's a huge percentage of UNO faculty. So there's this enormous wave of potential retirees, and if they just retired and drifted away from the university, that's that huge pool of talent that could be tapped into that maybe would not be. So we've got great hopes for this.
We've only got a few minutes left here, and there are a whole lot of things I want to talk about. Time always goes too quickly in these interviews, but one thing I don't want to miss is to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the interesting and influential people you've met on the campus. We've already talked about Hubert Locke, for example, but I'd be interested, for instance, in some of the other people in the philosophy department. We've talked a little bit about your friend Mike Gillespie, but there were others too, Cliff Anderberg, for example.
Right. And I remember a couple dear friends, Dwayne Willard and Ron Burke, who passed away a few years ago from cancer, but when I came to the philosophy department, these guys welcomed me in with such open arms. I mean, not just on campus, but to play golf, to help me move, just really wonderful people. And then, you know, one of the most unforgettable people that I've ever worked with is Don Denninger, who you had on the program some weeks ago.
Who was chair of the Goodrich program.
He was chair of the Goodrich program for 18 years. He served quietly, never drawing much attention to himself. As you know from having interviewed him, he was a priest for a number of years, and he was the head of Catholic Social Services in town. And he had this idea of service as being a privilege. And when I came here, I really was interested in philosophy. And I had some interest in serving students. But I think unless you work under a beautiful person like Don and see how rewarding a life of service can be from someone like that, let me just tell you one little anecdote. I never beat Don Denninger to work, and I go to work early. I remember once I had to go in really early to get some work done, and the Goodrich program was in a separate building, like an old house. I came in about 7 in the morning. It was winter, and people had tracked in some sand and gravel on the front rug. Don is standing there vacuuming the rug. He's got his bow tie and sleeveless sweater, the whole schmear, and he's got this blissful look on his face. I walk in the door, and he looks up at me with this blissful look, and he says, "Isn't this wonderful? Monday morning, lots of good work to do."
We've got to wrap up there.
So
I really thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry our time is up because there are lots of other things we could talk about. And to our audience, I want to thank you for joining us today in the visit with Dr. Jerry Cederblom, a long-time faculty member in the UN Omaha Goodrich Scholarship Program. We've been taking a look at some of the history of UN Omaha as seen through the eyes of those who made that history. This is Jack Newton inviting you to join us again in the series we call Reflections in Time.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.